Good evening and greetings everyone, wherever you are in the Caribbean and around the world. Welcome to ECCB Digital Dialogues, a special series designed to engage you as we navigate this pandemic together. Tonight, our focus is pandemic and regional air transport. I think we would all agree that this pandemic has disrupted our lives and our economies. Indeed, many businesses are now fighting for their survival. Jobs have been lost, and many more are at stake. Almost 2 weeks ago, we learned of the imminent liquidation of LIAT. And of course, the question has arisen on all of our minds: how will we travel and connect with each other? What about our tourism? And of course, for the ECCB, several of our mandates cannot be discharged without air connectivity. So this issue of air transport in our region touches and concerns all of us. And tonight, we want to explore the realities, but especially the possibilities as we contemplate the future of regional air travel. I'm delighted to have with me tonight an excellent panel which will help us with many of these questions. And I will come to the panel and introduce them shortly. But before we do that, a few housekeeping announcements. This dialogue is being streamed live on our ECCB Connect's Facebook page. I'm also pleased to note that the following radio stations are carrying this broadcast live. In Anguilla, Radio Anguilla. In Antigua and Barbuda, ABS Radio. In the Commonwealth of Dominica, Q95 FM. In Grenada, GBN Classic 105 FM. In Montserrat, ZJB Radio Montserrat. In St. Kitts and Nevis, ZIZ Radio. In St. Lucia, WVent 93.5, 94.7 FM. And in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, NBC Radio. Attendees in the Zoom session will have their microphones muted and cameras turned off to ensure a smooth flow of the dialogue. Attendees are invited to submit their comments in the chat box. If you have questions for the panel, please use the Q&A box for your questions. Remember the Q&A box, not the chat box, to ensure that your questions reach us on the panel. As moderator, I will read out the questions and direct them to our panelists. We also have a colleague from the Central Bank monitoring our Facebook page for any questions or comments from our viewers on Facebook, and their questions will also be transferred to the Zoom room to allow the panelists to have an opportunity to respond. As always, we encourage a respectful dialogue. We encourage your full participation, and we ask that you keep the dialogue clean. If we see any offensive language, we will have that removed. So please keep it clean. The recording of the dialogue will remain on the ECCB Connect's Facebook page for anyone who wants to view after this event. In the event that you have any technical difficulties and lose connectivity, please reconnect to the dialogue with a link previously provided. That's our housekeeping announcements. And now to the panel. First of all, we have with us the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. the Honourable Ralph Gonsalves, who is no stranger to anyone in our community. Dr. Gonsalves, Prime Minister Gonsalves, is the Prime Minister in the CARICOM quasi-cabinet responsible for transport. And that is precisely the reason why we've asked him to join. That is his portfolio. But he is also the chairman of the shareholder committee for LIAT, and he is the current CARICOM chairman. Prime Minister Gonsalves, good evening and welcome.
And all the best to the panelists.
Great. Thank you, sir. We'll be hearing from you shortly. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Justin Ram. Dr. Ram, many of you would know, was until recently the Director of Economics at the Caribbean Development Bank. He is now in the private sector. He is the managing partner, co-founder, and CEO of GSEC, and he's also the CEO of Justin Ram Advisory. Justin, welcome.
Thank you very much, Governor. Pleasant good evening
Very good.
To my fellow panelists.
Right. And of course, we now want to introduce Mr. Donald McPhail. He is a very experienced regulator in aviation, and he has been the Director General of the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority for the last 10 years. Mr. McPhail, good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Governor. Good evening, everyone. Pleasure to be here.
Great. Very good. And so there you have it, our panel, and we're going to go straight into it. As usual, we have 3 segments. The first segment, the moderator will pose some questions to the panelists. Thereafter, we will have the second segment, which is a poll. And this evening, we'll have 3 questions for you. And this is usually a very exciting segment. You get to weigh in immediately on some issues. And in the third segment, which is our longest segment, is where you ask your questions and the panelists respond. And so let us begin with our panel. Prime Minister, I'd like to pose the first question to you. As the Prime Minister responsible for transport in the CARICOM Quasi-Cabinet, could you share your perspective on the importance of regional air transport to the regional integration movement and to the development of our Caribbean civilization? Prime Minister?
Thank you very much, Governor. Well, I think everybody accepts the proposition that without regional air transportation, you really can't properly have a community. We are a community of islands and a couple of countries on the South American mainland, Central America. And there can be no community unless we have transportation between our islands, to carry people, to carry goods, and in the case of air transportation, to take our people to do their jobs across the region for business and for the tourists. And most of our economies are tourist dependent, and even one like St. Vincent, which is not as, St. Vincent and Grenadines is not as dependent as on tourism to the extent of, say, Antigua or Barbados or Jamaica. St. Vincent and Grenadines and Dominica would be 2 of the countries not quite as dependent on tourism as the others, though we are becoming increasingly so. And without it, we just can't do our business. It's simple as that. We must have it. It is a sine qua non, absolute necessity.
Right, right. Thank you, Prime Minister. And that sets the stage for some of the very important discussions.
If I may just add,
Yes.
Governor, we have to have that transportation, which is air transportation, which is reliable, which is safe, which is affordable, and which is sustainable.
Yes.
Those are critical elements for this regional air transport system, which links to our life, living, and production. And of course, I will add, by way of introduction, that for me, the clear preference is always to have air transport, as far as is practicable, owned and controlled by the people of the region or the governments of the region. Either the people through the private sector or the governments, and in whatever forms of participation, so that in the region, a foreign entity just can't take up and leave. And they're more likely to do so if they're not owned and controlled by us in the region. And I say as far as is practicable, because there are circumstances in which you have to make accommodations to certain matters which may not be your top preference. I put that in the mix.
Right, right. So thank you, Prime Minister, because I think what you've laid out are some key guiding principles around which we need to locate this discussion this evening about regional air transport. I think you said affordable, reliable, safe, and also sustainable. And I'm sure these themes will come back as we go forward with this conversation. Thank you, Prime Minister. Let me McPhail. And Mr. McPhail, as a regional regulator, just tell us briefly, what is precisely is the role of the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority? You need to unmute. Yes.
My apologies. With respect to the role of the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority, which, based on the length of its name, if you would permit me, I would love to say ECCA.
Right.
Okay. Now, ECCA is a civil aviation authority for 6 member states of the Eastern Caribbean. These states are Antigua and Barbuda, the Commonwealth of Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. According to the law, no thing, person, or document can enter civil aviation without the express approval of the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority. In this regard, when it comes to air transportation, the ECCA carries out full oversight in the areas of flight operations, airworthiness of aircraft, and personnel licensing. In this regard, the ECCA carries out a number of functions, including the approval of documents with respect to flight operations, with respect to the maintenance of aircraft, and with respect to the personal licensing, the licensing of basically pilots, aircraft engineers, and in the near future, we are now in the process of licensing air traffic controllers. In the past, air traffic controllers operated under an approval from their respective governments, but within the next few months, air traffic controllers would be required to hold license to practice. Now, with respect to the functions, the evaluation of applications for approvals may take some time. Usually it takes around 6 months for an airline to be certified by the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority. This is normally a standard in most of the CAAs, the civil aviation authorities in the region. At the end of the process, an air operator would be issued what we refer to as an air operator certificate, which once that air operator holds that certificate, that operator is required to operate in accordance with whatever is written in its manuals, the flight operations manuals, the maintenance manual, as well as the crew performance. I will stop here for the time being. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Director General. And so what we see is the vital role of ECCA in the safety of aviation in our region. And many people perhaps don't even know what ECCA does. And that's why we thought it useful to ask you about that. And remember, that goes to the principle of safety, which Prime Minister Gonsalves started with a short while ago. Prime Minister, I'd like to return to you and ask you this question. We know that LIAT has had a long and difficult history as a principal regional air carrier in our parts. After so many years in operation, and with support from our governments, what considerations ultimately influenced the decision to liquidate the airline at this particular juncture? Prime Minister?
Well, I must put it formally. On the 23rd of June, the Board of Directors of LIAT, under the chairmanship of Professor Owen Arthur, the former Prime Minister of Barbados, the Board of Directors met and they decided upon a receipt of an analysis of LIAT's financial position, concluded that LIAT couldn't pay its debts, and recommended that it be liquidated. And that came to the shareholders. Well, I summoned a meeting of the major shareholders, and we received that report. And the decision was taken to liquidate LIAT. And there is a meeting scheduled, I think it's for the 31st of July, and an ordinary a meeting of the ordinary shareholders and the creditors. Now, what I said there is self-evident, and I wanted to put it in formal legal terms, because when I'm talking about a subject like this, you would appreciate that I have to be very precise, right? I state what is precise first. But the immediate backdrop is this. LIAT had been suffering losses on an annual basis, and they could have been funded. While we seek to do reforms and the like. But in 2017, 2 Category 5 storms and Category 5 hurricanes and several storms caused LIAT to lose in that year $40-odd million. That carried over into 2018. LIAT lost about $30 million in 2018. 2019, there was a recovery of sorts. We lost $14 million. And then up to the end of May, the number which I received from the management 2-3 weeks ago was $35 million because of COVID.
Right.
Now, if you can't pay your bills and none of the shareholders is in a position to make up the shortfall, Barbados made it very plain, and they are almost 50% of the airline shareholding. They said they can't put any more money, that they're on the tough IMF program, and they're just not able to do it. Similarly, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica and St. Vincent and the Grenadines didn't step up to the plate. Well, then it becomes inevitable that you have to liquidate under the laws of Antigua and Barbuda. And the question is, are you going to have an orderly liquidation, or are you going to have a disorderly one? The arithmetic was simply compelling. I know there is a discussion which my friend, the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, is initiating, and to have a LIAT 2020 rise out of the ashes, so to speak, of LIAT 1974 Limited. But that's a discussion I'm going ahead of myself. But you asked me the specific question, and that was really the trigger. Of course, LIAT has certain problems. Look, air transport, regional air transport, Governor, the market is small and fractured. And I think Justin would appreciate that as an economist, so you too would appreciate. Then LIAT has a number of legacy issues. LIAT was running a lot of social routes, which can't, as we say in the region, the dance can't pay for the light.
Right.
And no one was, the countries to which these services were being delivered, they were not putting in equity nor market support as they do to some other airlines, until Grenada recently put in money. Prime Minister Keith Mitchell recognized the necessity and desirability. He put in $1 million late last year, earlier this year. Then the question of very uneven labor and management productivity. When we did the refleeting with the ATRs, you may recall the summer when that refleeting was done, it was not done very smoothly in every material particular by the management, and there were challenges. their climate-related costs, then of course, the taxes are very high in the region and making air transport more expensive than it ought to be. And in some years, fuel costs go through the roof. So these are some of the structural problems. And it is true that in some critical jurisdictions, the labor laws, to use the language of the modern economists, they're anti-competitive and inflexible. And therefore, the operations of the airline become problematic within that particular environment. But you could have written all of those things and provide this fantastic service, which LIAT has been provided by and large. But then, how are you going to stem these losses, 2017, 2018, 2019, when I can speak of $14 million in 2019 as a recovery of sorts, and then 35 million with COVID by month 5. Heavenly Father, Timothy, something has to be done. That's the long and short of the story. I could add details here and there, but that's in a nutshell what we are faced with.
Right. Thank you, Prime Minister, for laying it out. I think what you said is clear that this decision was not arrived at hastily. And there have been many efforts by your government and the others, the shareholders, to keep
undoubtedly.
To keep it going over a very long time. So we'll come back shortly to the question of, so what happens now? Because that's what everyone wants to know.
That's a critical matter.
That is a critical matter. So we get into that very shortly, but we have to lay the groundwork in terms of why we got here, and that's what you explained a moment ago. So let me turn to Dr. Ram. And Dr. Ram, help us understand a little bit the economics of running an airline in this region. Specifically, what are some of the main challenges to operating a profitable airline in the Eastern Caribbean? Dr. Ram.
Very well. Thanks, Timothy. Well, if I would just start off and look, running an airline anywhere in the world is quite difficult. Most airlines don't really make much profit as it relates to the return on equity and capital. And as one famous billionaire once said, if you want to make a millionaire, then ask a billionaire to start an airline. So I am not naive in saying that it is difficult. But I think that it's important for us to understand that times have changed. We have young entrepreneurs now in the region who I think can do some great things. But let me just set out for you what I think are some of the main challenges as it relates to running an airline in the Caribbean. And these I want to couch within the macro environment as well as in the micro. So some things airline operators have control over, but others they don't. So let me just first of all set out some of the key challenges at the macro level, which I think air operators need to contend with, and which I think policymakers need to effectively take care of. First of all, I think on the macro side, I'm referring this to as government and as the regulation. We really need a regulatory environment that is facilitated. And I think that Prime Minister Gonsalves has already spoken about the need for us to bring down the high taxes and fees that airlines face in the region. On some routes, taxes and fees make up as much as 60% of the airfare. So when you have something like that, it becomes very difficult to make a profit. But also more importantly, Timothy, that also is against price elasticity. As you know, the lower the price, then more than likely we'll have higher volumes. And by the very nature of that, airlines can possibly become much more profitable if prices are allowed to come down. Secondly, on regulations, I think it's time for us in the Caribbean to have a single Caribbean airspace. The MASA really needs to come into full effect. That is a multilateral air services agreement.
Right. Go ahead. I was just about to say what MASA means.
Yes, the multilateral air services agreement. And I think it is time for us in the Caribbean to have maybe a single regulator. So if, for example, I am authorized to operate out of St. Vincent, that should give me clearance to operate anywhere in the Caribbean. I think this is where we need to go. And more importantly there, Timothy, I think that having a single Caribbean airspace is critical also for the passengers. It means that once I enter the Caribbean through immigration, I shouldn't have to go through immigration and customs again. We really need to have one set of rules so that we have that single airspace. On infrastructure, this I think is particularly important because the airports that we have in the region are huge cost centers, and it's actually one of the reasons why we have such high taxes and fees. And if you think about it, for our size of population in the Caribbean, if we were a single landmass, we would probably only have about 3 airports or so. But because of our fractures, we are small islands, we have many airports to contend with, and those are quite costly. So I think the model around airports and how we utilize infrastructure needs to change. We need to stop thinking about them as cost centers and start turning them into revenue centers. They really need to be hubs of commerce attached to a runway. So I think that it is time for us to consider that. With respect to routes, I think that it's critical for us to understand that some routes are always going to be very thin and perhaps are going to always be natural monopolies. And so I think as a regulator, and this comes back again to Prime Minister Gonsalves and certainly to Donald, how we regulate those types of routes is really important because they're probably going to be natural monopolies. And we really want to incentivize as much as possible the most efficient carriers on those routes. Now, let me just turn to operators quite quickly. Really, what's been happening as well in the Caribbean is that we've been using the wrong type of equipment on some type of routes, so that we've had large aircraft operating on very thin routes. And I think now we have to consider moving towards a more private sector approach whereby we could perhaps use smaller aircraft on some routes and therefore gain some efficiencies there. Another point I think is really important is that subsidies. If we are going to subsidize 1 or 2 airlines, then we probably have to subsidize all. But I don't think anyone in the Caribbean now, no government really has the appetite for subsidies. So as we now think about the future, we really have to ensure that we are not subsidizing any airlines because then it will lead to unfair competitive advantages. And that will certainly mean the end of any sort of private sector involvement. So that is a particularly important point, which I think we need to be cognizant of. And then with respect to operator staff, we know that unfortunately, because of route schedules, the way how airports might operate, staff have also not been utilized in the most efficient way. And I think that coming back to Dr. Gonsalves' approach here, we really need a model that perhaps gives some employee stock ownership plans so that employees can have a stake in the airlines as well, so that they have a stake in how well these airlines perform and how they are managed. It cannot be something that is separate. They must have a stake in how well the airline performs. And so really incentivize them to do what is right to make the airline profitable. And then finally, I think on customers, we have to pay particular attention to them. I think in the region, we've done a really good job with respect to safety. And so I really want to commend Dr. Gonsalves because he has been responsible for transport in the region. I think our region is perhaps one of the safest in the world. So we've done a really good job and we want to maintain that. But there are other areas where we need to make customers much more comfortable. I think it is time for us to develop a sophisticated travel insurance market because that is also critical to give customers comfort. So as we are thinking about the future where we might be allowing more players into the market, we really need to ensure that there is insurance because if something happens to a carrier, for example, we know that our customers are well covered and that gives them comfort as well. So the travel insurance market must be something that goes hand in hand with this. And I should also say that as we look towards the future, going digital must be the way. I think that there are a lot of people out there who are thinking about how we can have fractional ownership of assets and digitalizing. But even more importantly, the initiative that you are doing in the Eastern Caribbean with the advent of the digital currency is something that should make travel even easier and make payments easier for tickets. And then let me just say a few more things. Comes back to this thing, price elasticity is important. Every time I speak to someone in the street, they say, oh, Justin, why is it that I can't simply go from Barbados to St. Lucia? Maybe I could have lunch in St. Lucia and come back if it was affordable. These are the types of things we need to start encouraging, because once we have more volumes on these routes, they're likely to become a lot more profitable. And then finally, Timothy, I think that we can't see air travel as on its own. This is a regional economic issue, and it should be going tandem with any other policy plans that we're putting in place. For example, as we speak about air travel, it cannot be separate from when we speak about tourism policy, for example. We have to be speaking about all of these things in tandem for it to make sense for us. Air transport, as Dr. Gonsalves has said, is a very important issue. It is not just a transport issue, it is a regional economic issue. So thank you.
Right, thank you, Justin, for laying that out. And of course, Justin is coming from the private sector and has a perspective as an economist. So thanks for that. So that is a nice segue to return to Prime Minister Gonsalves. Prime Minister, given the recent decision to liquidate LIAT 1974 Limited, and of course the proposal by the government of Antigua and Barbuda to possibly launch a new entity, LIAT 2020 Limited, what can we expect in terms of the future for regional connectivity amongst our islands?
If I may just, before I answer you, let me just say that many of the ideas that Justin has just put out are ideas which have been canvassed quite a lot. He himself has had some discussion leading in that regard. And many of them are workable. There are a few, if the discussion goes into that direction, I would point out some practical difficulties. But by and large, it's a reasonable framework. Now, where do we go? LIAT is not now the only player in the region, and its importance in recent years has been diminishing. I identify 4 carriers at the moment on which we can fill the gap and to create additional demand. One of them is a state-owned airline and 3 private sector airlines. CAL, Caribbean Airlines. I want to be very specific and pointed, Timothy. Yes. CAL has 12 jets in which they service the region and with the outside world. They have 7 ATR 72s to do the Tobago Air Bridge and also to come into the Southern and Eastern Caribbean. I've been advised that they have 2 other ATRs on standby that they can take to bring their fleet to 9. They claim that they could do 80% of the pre-COVID, 80% of LIAT's pre-COVID network. Let's even say they can't do 80, that they can do 70, that they can do 65. That will make them clearly the most significant player in any new configuration, because they were seeing the gaps, and Ronnie Mohammed and his team, the chairman, they were looking forward to expanding. So that's Caribbean Airlines. In the north, you have Intercaribbean. Intercaribbean out of Turks and Caicos, a private sector airline. They have 15, 16 aircraft of different kinds, from turboprops to regional jets of different sizes. They serve the Northern Caribbean fairly well. They have reached down to Antigua, and they do a few flights to Dominica and St. Lucia. They want now to expand in the Southern and Eastern Caribbean. they've either received or about to receive permission from Barbados, Grenada, St. Lucia. They've also applied for permission to Dominica and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and those applications are going through the works. And we need to move faster. The bureaucracy in these things move, both the approval mechanism, the air transport and licensing board within each country has to move faster, and so too the oversight supervisory authorities like ECCA. And I don't think, Mark, that reasonably in this time, you can say that you're taking 6 months to have inter-Caribbean in the sky. Because they're wrong already. So those are two airlines. For instance, in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, they've written to us. They say we can do St. Vincent Tortola directly. We can do St. Vincent Antigua Tortola and return. We can do St. Vincent Tortola, Antigua, St. Vincent, Trinidad and Tobago. They say we can do Barbados and including all the rights, the 7 freedom rights between ourselves for Barbados. And the MASA, the Multilateral Air Services Agreement, provides for that particular framework. And then there are 2 smaller airlines, one which is owned by Vincentians, but 2 of their aircraft, 2 SAB 30-seaters and a 19-seater, 2 of the 3 are registered in Barbados. I'm talking about One Caribbean, by young professionals, entrepreneurs. They did heroic work during the time of COVID. They went to Havana with the SABs, stopped in Dominican Republic to bring students out. They went to Jamaica and brought students out for Dominica. They brought students out for St. Lucia, Grenada, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines. They took, I've been advised, the 33 Trinidadians who were marooned in Barbados for a short while to Trinidad and Tobago. So they have, I know that they have gone for another, they're going for another SAB 30-seater. In fact, it's a 34-seater, but they take out the back row so that they can have 2,500 pounds of cargo. If they have a 30-seater, 50 pounds, that's 1,500 pounds there, so they have an extra 1,000, space for another 1,000 pounds. And then there's SVG Air. They have the 6 Twin Otters, 4 of them owned by the Mustique Company, and I've spoken to them. They run them for the Mustique Company and 2 for themselves. They want to get a 3rd one. Twin Otters are workhorses all over the world, and particularly in island nation states. They move, they're quite efficient and very safe. At the moment, they operate between Dominica and Antigua in the north. They operate Antigua, St. Kitts, Nevis, routes which are smaller, which you can't take a 72-seater, even 50-seater. Making Justin's point that there are spaces for smaller airlines like the SAB aircraft, like the SAB with a 30-seater, the SVG Air with a 19-seater Twin Otter. In fact, they also have 2 9-seater Islanders, which they used to go to Cane Field in Dominica. Because business people want to go close to Roseau rather than to go Melville Hall and take the 1.5 hours, 2 hours ride along a winding roadway to get to Roseau to do work. Now, we have to get the various airlines working together. There's nothing wrong, for instance, instead of CAL taking their ATR 72s, which is a 70-seater, on certain hours going to Tobago, they could probably code share one of the smaller airlines to do one of those routes while they leave their equipment to do longer haul. But make no mistake about it, CAL is not going to run an unprofitable route. CAL is not going to do a social route. Neither any of these three private sector airlines. If you want a route, you're going to have to pay for it. If you're going to do any subsidies. So I think you asked me about what exists. I give you 4. But I have a list here of 38 airlines that operate in the Caribbean. 10 of them are international carriers from outside of the Caribbean. And the other 28 function within the region. Admittedly, most of them are in the north of Northern Caribbean. But I identify 4. And the other investors who want to come, Timothy, and participate. In the case of LIAT 2020, which Prime Minister Brown is advancing, that would also have to be, if it comes up, that will certainly be in the mix. The problem, of course, with that, if you want to use LIAT planes, 3 of them are owned by the Caribbean Development Bank. The 3 which LIAT owns, so to speak, they're not owned by LIAT. They're owned by the CDB. They have a charge on them to the full value of those airlines. And there are 3 governments that provide the guarantees at the CDB. In fact, the 3 governments have been paying the loan. LIAT, we ought to provide the guarantee and LIAT pay the loans, but as Justin would know, it's years now that LIAT can't pay the money. So Barbados pays their part, Antigua and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And Barbados is $30-something million US, as I recall the number. Antigua is about 21. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is $5 million US. In terms of those 3, there are other monies which were invested, because at that time, Timothy, when we were refleeting, we tended to put in money before in dealing with the losses in more or less equal proportions. But when we arrived at the refleeting point, I insisted on the application of an Aristotelian principle of equity among equals, proportionality among unequals, so that Barbados, being the largest of the beneficiaries from LIAT, would naturally have to take more money, and then Antigua, and then St. Vincent and Grenadines, and then Dominica joined subsequently as an equity partner.
Right.
So that's in a nutshell. There are a lot more details I can give, and I've spoken fairly quickly on these things, but you notice that there is a plan. Yeah. And I have been in touch with the owners, the managers, the leaders in those four airlines. Others have contacted me, people from outside of the region who operate in the region, like Sunshine out of Florida and Cape Airlines, a commuter airline in the US. But I've focused on those which are within our region in accordance with the principle which I enunciated earlier about ownership and control by governments or citizens to control our airspace.
Right. So, Prime Minister, thanks for that. And as not just the Prime Minister responsible for transport, but also as the current chairman of CARICOM, I think it is encouraging to hear that significant discussions are underway about a service, a reliable, affordable service.
I will say this.
Yes.
One Caribbean started their service, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Barbados, and returned with their SAB. On Sunday, the first time in our part of the world, there has been commercial air travel regionally, after LIAT had suspended operations first on the 29th of March. SVG Air is going to begin shortly. They might have started because they were going to Grenada. They were talking to the Prime Minister of Grenada. That's the first place they were going. They serve, of course, St. Vincent and Grenadines. They do charters and the like to other places nearby. And Cal will start, Cal going to move one or two other planes to Barbados, the ATR 72s. And they're going to start a service maybe next week, which would involve the starting out in Barbados, Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines to start first. So that already we are seeing an opening up, Timothy, by these airlines. It's
right. So Prime Minister, right. So that's encouraging. I mean, there is capacity, and there, as you said, there's some services have recently started. I think one of the questions that arises, Prime Minister, is how will we configure an optimal arrangement for these airlines? Because as you said, some of the routes that LIAT ran were unprofitable. They were social routes. How do we avoid the cherry picking of routes by some airlines and the non-servicing of certain routes by others because they're not profitable? How do we get that appropriate mix to ensure we get a good service and the same principles you espouse at the beginning?
Vital question. There are only two ways that I know that you can do this. Is by the airlines having discussions while they have their competition, they have their cooperation, and to see to what extent they can code share on which routes. And because of the different models which they have and different kind of aircraft, some are going to be able to go to routes where you don't require as large a piece of equipment. So I think they have to coordinate. And then secondly, as always, at the end of the day, is the question of investment issues and market, which are going to act to tell us where certain resources go and where certain resources don't go. And if any route which is required to be done, which is unprofitable, whether any government considers that route important enough to provide a minimum revenue guarantee, because they do that with international air carriers. So it has to be an interplay between the air carriers themselves in the region, have to do with the investment and marketing decisions, and also what the governments would do. And critically, in all of this, there have to be supportive government policies. Like St. Vincent and Grenadines, we have already cut our taxes from 40 US to 20 US. We have, Grenada has announced that they're doing that. The Prime Minister of Grenada has just spoken to that. I know Roosevelt Skerritt, the Prime Minister in Dominica, is talking the same thing. Prime Minister Chasten is talking the same thing. Though in the case of St. Lucia, there is a quote-unquote a development fee or levy, which is to deal with the development of Hiwanura, which is separate and distinct from the departure tax. I think Antigua has a departure tax plus this other development kind of levy or fee. So there is, I think, a general acceptance that we have to lower the taxes. It means that the governments will have to put more money from the consolidated fund in the short run to operate the airports and move into a model with some of the ideas suggested by Justin to make them places to do business in addition to just being locales for the movement of passengers. Because at the moment, the restaurants are there for the passengers, by and large. maybe you can have other facilities without compromising security to do things and to sell and buy and the like. But that's part of the exploration of a different perspective as to what the aerodrome is one thing, but the terminal building, another one. Then there are all kinds of things. Electricity costs have to go down with solar and all the rest of it.
Right. So Prime Minister, on that, just two quick follow-ups. What can you tell us about the MASA, the Multi-Year Services Agreement? How many people have signed up on that? And I'm tying that to Justin's earlier comments about the open skies, the free, the single space. And secondly, the CARICOM took a decision, I think, to have a bubble. That is to say, to allow intra-regional travel in this pandemic based on the low risk of member countries. So the combination, and some countries, I think, started this on July 15th or maybe a little earlier. Could you comment on the CARICOM bubble and comment on the MASA? Because what we're trying to do is to share with the public earlier a reasonable expectation about what the travel arrangement would look like in the region, in the Eastern Caribbean, in the upcoming weeks and months. Prime Minister, we're not hearing you. Are you muted?
Sorry.
Right.
I'm saying.
So MASA and the bubble. Just speak to that.
From what I can see here, all the countries, save and except, of course, Montserrat, which is under the aegis of the British government, and Haiti, which is a different regime altogether. All the other countries have signed, but there are 6 countries which have ratified up to when I saw the data about 2-3 weeks ago. I know Dominica was ratifying and ratified up to when I saw the data about 2-3 weeks ago. I know Dominica was ratifying an extra one, and a couple other countries were ratifying. We needed an extra one 3 weeks or so ago for us to apply the treaty. It's really to facilitate greater movements for aircraft. For instance, if you look, I have it here with me, Article 5, the grant of rights. It says in paragraph 1 of Article 5, each member state grants to the other member states for the benefit of air carriers designated by those member states under Article 6. These are the carriers which are designated as CARICOM carriers. A, the right to fly across its territory without landing. B, the right to make stops in its territory for non-traffic purposes. C, the 7 freedom rights, which is vital. And D, rights of cabotage. And E, the rights otherwise specified in this agreement. So that this updated MASA from the 1996-1997 one is one which is opening up the skies more and will facilitate greater movement of air transport and different types of aircraft and so forth, smaller ones, like what I've been describing. The MASA is intended to create such an environment. In relation to the bubble has to do, this is where air transport connects with COVID. Mm-hmm. The idea of the bubble is that really, once the territories are at the same level in respect of infection and all the rest of it, and the way we have all controlled it, is that you wouldn't require a PCR test upon arrival in any country which is in the bubble. You'll do the temperature checks, the boots on the ground, epidemiologists, the nurses watch you when you come in and so on, so that you get, you move safely without requiring a PCR, either where you're leaving or when you're arriving, or indeed, even a rapid test of a particular kind. So that would facilitate.
And what about quarantining? What would be the position?
No. There wouldn't be any quarantining either. But of course, if you if when they do the basic checks, the temperature checks. This is about a management of risk, you know, Timothy.
Yes, it is. It is.
But you would have to be in the territory for 14 days. You can't go from St. Kitts, Timothy, to avoid. You want to go. You go from St. Kitts to Miami, and you come from Miami with American to St. Vincent, American airline. You will have to either do your PCR out of the USA in Miami, or you have to do it when you come in St. Vincent. And there will be a period of quarantining because you would not have been in the Caribbean territory for 14 days continuously, immediately before your arrival. So the bubble has that defining element too. But once we do that bubble and we get it, we have to go back to what we did during Cricket World Cup.
Yes, yes.
To have one space.
Yes.
That's easier to get done, in my judgment, than even at the time of COVID, once we have the bubble working, than Justin's suggestion about a single authority, a single aviation authority. I don't think that this is going to happen. I don't think you're going to even a single aviation authority inside of the Eastern Caribbean. You may have a single aviation authority between Barbados and the OECS countries, the 6 independent countries. But I don't see, as a practical matter, at the moment, that would involve Trinidad, and I don't see Jamaica in it. Though there is a model with a single agency, a single authority in Central America. What we do have in the region, we coordinate things like safety. So there's CASOS, which is a regional body dealing with and McPhail could talk more about this, safety oversight. We have problems, Timothy and Justin, and McPhail can tell you from ECCA, in relation to our airspace. Trinidad and Tobago, through a regional entity called CANAS, controls the airspace for the purpose of taking the fees. It's an old thing where when Eric Williams had it, I've been advised, taken away from a private sector entity from Britain, and all the countries agreed for Trinidad to have it. But the money which is collected is not shared properly, and this is a long-standing battle. I just want to put that down. I don't want to cause any friction with anybody at all. But I can't talk about air transportation unless I talk about that too. And McPhail can fill in the blanks. And he, being a regional public servant, might be better placed to speak in an authoritative sense on that than Ralph.
Right. So, Prime Minister, thanks. I thought your next comment was CCJ, but I see you've reserved that for the time being. And I will leave that there. So let's say.
No, I only write personal editorials once in a while.
I hear you, sir. So let's hold that and let's pose the last question in this round to Mr. McPhail. Director General, as we think about these operators, some of which Prime Minister mentioned, the issue of safety is key. How, as a regulator, ECCA, do you see us being able to maintain these high standards of safety with these other airlines and operators that are likely to be joining the space or expanding their operations in the Eastern Caribbean?
Okay, thank you. First, permit me to address the issue of the air operator certificate. When I mentioned that process to grant an air operator certificate can take up to 6 months. This was referring to operators that from establishment to certification for operation. And these will be operators registered with the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority. Generally, this is the standard. Now, Prime Minister Gonsalves challenged me and said that 6 months to approve an operator, as mentioned by Dr. Ram, is ridiculous. And I do agree. In such cases, for CAL to be granted permission to operate in the region or inter-Caribbean, it will not take 6 months. It will take just a matter of weeks or days. Because these are established airlines. They already hold an air operator certificate issued by the state of registry. So whenever one such operator should apply for commercial rights in any state, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for example, the Air Transport Licensing Authority or the Air Transport Licensing Board in that state would consult the ECA based on the technical aspects of the airline. In other words, we would do a technical evaluation of the airline, and it does not take such a long period of time. Like I said, it can take a few days or maybe a week or so. And generally, when we respond, we would say we have no difficulty. We look at the process for the issuance of the air operator certificate by the particular state of registry. Once we are satisfied that it was done in accordance with the international requirements as issued by the International Civil Aviation Organization, we will advise the state that the airline or the operator is fit and proper for service.
Okay, right. So thanks for that. Prime Minister, you wanted to come back in? I'm going to do the poll in a moment, but Prime Minister, please.
For clarification.
Yes.
No, my brother Mark, even though that the airline has an air operating certificate and AOC from its own jurisdiction, you require, among other things, as I understand it, you have to be satisfied clearly about the maintenance. You have to be where they're going to do their maintenance. What are those facilities like? You have to look at issues concerning their insurance. Do they have a sufficiency of insurance with the documentation provided? Is the insurance coverage adequate within the rules? And then you want to be sure that the pilots who are going to fly the plane, some basic things. And you say that these can take between days and weeks. Given the fact that there's such urgency, can we get an assurance from you that in the case of the Eastern Caribbean, that these things would take a few days rather than weeks, because it makes a difference?
I'm not sure if I want to give an assurance, but it depends on the size of the operator, the types of aircraft they operate. For example, if it's an operator like LIAT, the fleet consists of one particular type, it would be a lot quicker than an airline that may have 5, 6 different types of airplane. In that case, though, we can fast track the process by looking at the type of aircraft that the airline proposes to operate in the area. So let's say Inter-Caribbean says, okay, it would use ATRs. We just look at the maintenance with respect to ATRs, the crew qualification, the engineer's qualification, and that's basically it. But at times you would have difficulty and you may have to go consult other agencies depending on the type of aircraft. But generally, the list of that you mentioned earlier, Caribbean Airlines, Inter-Caribbean, those are the 2 foreign ones. We can guarantee you that that can be done in days.
Right. So what we
comfortable with
think,
that?
right. So what we're hearing is that ECCA is placed poised to be able to consider these applications as we have new entrants or existing operators expanding their operations in the Eastern Caribbean. Because the public really wants to know, when can we expect safe, affordable, and of course reliable air transport, given the current situation with LIAT. And of course, know that the bubble has been approved, because people do want to start moving. People need to connect. People need to go home to see families. Some people have been marooned in countries for months and need to travel. So Prime Minister, I'm glad to hear that you have been pushing on this issue, because as the Prime Minister responsible for transport, I think the region wants assurances that there will be a service, a safe, reliable, affordable, and sustainable service going forward. And I think what we heard from you, what we heard from Mr. McPhail, and of course, Dr. Ram's own intervention earlier, suggests that we have some ingredients to go forward. Now, the public has a few questions, and I'd like to get to those questions. But before we do that, we have a poll. So if we can put up the poll right now, we're going to do that. While we're getting the poll ready, I want to recognize the radio stations that are carrying this broadcast. In Anguilla, Radio Anguilla, Class FM and Cool FM. In Antigua, ABS Radio and Nice FM 104.3. In Dominica, Vibes Radio, Carry FM and DBS Radio. In Grenada, we have We FM, GBN and Sister Radio. Montserrat, ZJB Radio. In St. Kitts and Nevis, we have Win FM, 98.9 FM, Freedom FM, Vaughan Radio, ZIZ TV. And in St. Lucia, we have W Vents and Radio 100 Helen FM. So thank you for these partners who've joined us for this important dialogue. Now to the poll, www.menti.com. So whether you're on television, Zoom, Facebook, radio, if you want to be part of this poll, you put in on your phone, your iPad, your device, your desktop, whatever you're using, www.menti.com. And once you do that, the code is 227898. 227898. Those of you who are regulars, you know how this works. If you're doing it for the first time, I'll go through it again. Questions will begin to appear. You put in your homepage, www.menti.com. I'll go through it again. Question. Once you go to that site, you have to put in a code. The code is 227898. And after you've done that, the questions will appear. There are 3 questions, and here is the first. Do you agree or disagree with the decision to liquidate LIAT 1974 Limited? So that's the first question. Do you agree or disagree with the decision to liquidate LIAT 1974 Limited? And there are 2 options, agree or disagree. And we see people have begun to express their views. Again, for those of you who are doing this for the first time, you can do that Facebook, Zoom, radio, television. You need to get on a computer or device, www.menti.com, www.menti.com. Once you put that in, you need a code. The code is 227898, and you can begin. So far, we already have 91 persons who have polled, and you can see what is happening there. We're going to give you a few more, another 30 seconds. We want to get more people involved. In the Zoom room alone, we have in excess of 300 people. On Facebook, we have over 500, I'm told. Facebook, obviously, we have quite a few. I don't know the number. And of course, on the television and radio stations, people are also following this dialogue. So here you have it. Question number 1. Do you agree or disagree with the decision to liquidate LIAT 1974 Limited? And even as we discuss this question, let me say this, our heart goes out for the staff of LIAT, who are in a very difficult situation at this time. Many of them have given their life, their youth, they're primed to LIAT and to our region, and it's a difficult situation. And I think I want to recognize their toil and also recognize the challenge that they're in, and we're all in at this stage. And of course, we hope for a good outcome for them in terms of the arrangement going forward. Clearly, there will have to be changes, that's clear. We'll see how we proceed. But we just want to recognize the services of these people, many of whom we've grown very familiar with, have a lot of admiration and respect for over many years of flying together in the region. So LIAT pilots, crew, staff, we just want to recognize you tonight. So there you have it. 221 persons have already cast. Final 10 seconds for question number 1. And you can see on screen that a strong majority agrees with the decision to liquidate LIAT, 1974 Limited. All right, 184 agree, 54 disagree. I don't know what that percentage is, but clearly that looks like 60, a little more than 60, 65, probably a little more than that as well. So there you have it, question number 1. Let's move to the second question. Thank you very much, everyone. I think 250 people got in on that one. Let's go. Second question, do you think more competition is needed in regional air transport? Do you think more competition is needed in regional air transport? And you have 2 options, yes or no. So again, for those of you who are just joining us, welcome to ECCB Digital Dialogues. You can be part of this poll by putting in www.menti.com. And then you need a code, and the code is 227898. And question number 2 is, do you think more competition is needed in regional air transport? 2 options, yes or no. And we give you a minute. So far, 200 people have already polled, and we'll see where we end up shortly. And just looking up at the screen, 80% of votes cast so far believe that we need more competition in regional air transport. So that's a pretty decisive feedback from our participants. So thank you for that. And I'm hoping as we go forward with whatever will come out, the new arrangements, that we will also draw on lessons learned over the last 40 years and make sure that we can come up with something that is, as we said, safe, affordable, reliable, sustainable. Those are our guiding principles. So thank you for that. We've had, can we hit 300? I'm going to give you, let's see if we can hit 300. We are 285. We give you 10 more seconds. Let's see if we can get up to 300 persons in terms of the poll. We're at 292. All right, so I think we have a there, over 80%. I think that probably is 82% of persons believe that we need more competition in regional air transport. That's very clear. Thank you. Third question, please. Question number 3. What is the most important factor for you in your decision to travel within the region? What is the most important factor for you to travel within the region? 1, size of aircraft. 2, convenience of routes. 3, cost of airfare. 1, size of aircraft. 2, convenience of routes. 3, cost of airfare. What is the most important factor for you in your decision to travel within our region? Size of aircraft, convenience of routes, cost of airfare. And so far, 150 people, it's growing. Almost 160 have already cast their vote. And you can see on the screen that the overwhelming majority has chosen the cost of airfare. I don't think, Prime Minister, our panelists, that this is a surprise. I think it's a validation of what we hear all the time. And we spoke to that earlier. And Prime Minister did mention the fact that there are now moves afoot by several countries to reduce taxes, fees, and charges to reduce the cost of airfare and to incentivize intra-regional travel at this time. And clearly that is a welcome development. The people have spoken very clearly here. That is the number one issue for them when it comes to making a decision to travel or not. That's a very significant result. So again, over 80% persons have said that they believe cost is the issue. So thank you for that. I think we can conclude the poll. I think the evidence is there. And I want to thank everyone who joined in the poll. So with that, welcome back. That's the end of segment number 2. We now go to a third and final segment, which is the questions from you, the participants, you, our viewers and listeners. The first question: in what way should any airline serving new routes in the region improve its strategic approach to regional travelers relative to the approach previously employed by airlines? So I think the question really, Justin, perhaps you might want to weigh in on this. What must be different for those airlines which are coming in, based on lessons learned, based on LIAT's experience, based on the discussion of the last hour? What should we be doing differently as new airlines come in?
Okay, thanks, Timothy. Well, I think certainly we want the new airlines to operate as efficiently as possible. And I think the owners of those airlines would want that as well, because it doesn't make sense for their aircraft to be on the ground when it should be in the air. That's how you make money as an airline operator. So we really want that to be as efficient as possible. And I think, again, here, Timothy, I think a lot of these issues are also related to the other fundamental areas of regulatory environment and how we use our infrastructure. For example, one thing that we have in the region is that sometimes when an aircraft lands, you have to wait for a health inspector to come to the door before passengers can alight from that aircraft. I think that these are some things. Can't we do these things digitally in advance? So that leads into one area. I think what passengers really want now are greater conveniences. Can we do things more digitally? The sharing of information digitally. Do we really need to wait for a health inspector to come to the door? Because that also means that the aircraft has to stay longer on the ground. Some of the other things that we need to be cognizant of is the time it takes to go through immigration, the time it takes for us to get luggage when we are waiting at the carousels, for example. Overall, I think what we need is a greater level of collaboration between the airline operators and the operators of the airport infrastructure as well, understanding that they are working in partnership. And I think finally, because we're likely to have many more airlines operating, although the poll has said that we need to have much greater levels of competition, and I think that is true to some extent, we also have to have a greater level of collaboration. We need to have more code sharing. So if, for example, I am going from Barbados to Montserrat, and that means that I need to change planes, for example, in Antigua, that should be quite seamless. If I am now having to go on to another airline, that should be quite seamless. I must already have my ticket in hand because we have the code sharing. And I say ticket in hand, but what I really mean is that that ticket should really be on my phone, for example. So again, the whole need to go digital. And just to say, finally, as we're doing this all within the COVID environment, I think we need to be cognizant of what are the protocols that are going to be in place to ensure that aircraft are safe for passengers. This is a new reality that we're living in right now. what are the protocols that perhaps the regulators and the airlines are going to adhere to ensure that when people go onto those planes or they go into an airport environment, that they feel as if they can be biologically safe as well. I think these are some of the things that we need to be considering right now.
Right. Thank you, Justin. The only thing I didn't hear you mention the forms. Can we please do away with all these forms? And it appears that the smaller the country, the longer the form. Can we just find a digital way to address that?
Exactly.
Seriously, I mean, there's paper, there's cost to government, there's the environment to consider, there's the queuing up. Is there a simpler way to go on to add to your point about customer experience? To get the same information if you need it, but to avoid having to these long forms.
Of course, and this is what I mean when I say we really need to go towards digital and the sharing of the pre-passenger information between where you are leaving and where you're about to arrive. There really is no need for us to be filling out paper forms at the time we're getting there. Sometimes in some of the jurisdictions, those paper forms were used for survey information. But really, Timothy, we can still get all of that survey information digitally if we're able to share the information. So, you know, I'm pretty sure that the regulators have an idea of how you share that information, because there's one thing around data privacy is also an important consideration now. But I'm sure that we can share information in a way that still protects an individual's data privacy.
Right. Thank you. Prime Minister, there's a question.
May I add something to what Justin is saying? I want to say that, I don't know if you know this, already, from a security standpoint, we share information because we have the Advanced Passenger Information System. In all of our countries, through the Implementation Agency for Crime and Security, impacts that, and each of our countries, I say, we have legislation for advanced passenger information, so that when you leave a particular country, before the aircraft leaves, or as soon as the aircraft is up in the air, the information comes through, and it goes through a particular database where we know who are the persons who are coming in, whom the authorities need to look at very carefully from a security standpoint. A lot of work is being done now in respect of the information for persons to fill out the forms online in relation to information concerning COVID. And I think that could be extended to all sorts of things. We have done, pre-COVID, since last year, we did away with the information in St. Vincent with the forms, the immigration forms.
Great.
But you need to have the appropriate IT system so that you can get all the information which you require for tourism purposes.
Yes.
And to make your calculations, and you would appreciate that too, Timothy.
Yes.
The other thing, though, we need to have a synchronization of the kinds of IT systems, because some airlines would use a system where it would be common among a couple of other airlines for the purpose of code sharing. But some may use a different kind of system, which makes it difficult to connect, right? So you go online, you can book to go from point A to point B, but to move from B to C, it's a difficult thing to do the code sharing. And sometimes these information systems have been with people for a few years, and to change them is expensive. But if you want to develop the kinds of efficiencies which we are talking about, you will simply have to bite the bullet and make the alteration in those information systems. I said those as a practical matter.
Yeah, no, and that's important. So let me just follow up. So who will do that? This interlining, this coordination. Who is going to coordinate that?
Well, the interlining is done. The interlining is done really by the airlines themselves. Okay. And to do the code sharing and interlining, the airlines themselves would do it, but the state can facilitate it and ask that it be done.
Right. So what I'm hoping, Prime Minister, will happen in this period is that as operators, existing ones, LIAT 2020, if that comes around, whatever the airlines are, that there'll be a set of guidelines that national authorities working with ECHO would follow or require to sort of create that convergence around standards that allow for that collaboration, that coordination.
Well,
if not, it's going to be patchwork, and we will not get
I don't know. Well, Mark can say this. I don't know if ECHO has so much to do with the interlining or the code sharing. But because the airlines would need to do this as a practical economic efficiency matter. And the state, the respective countries can urge that this be done, as I have been urging in relation to these four players which are within the system. And if LIAT 2020 emerges out of Antigua, similarly, because I'm not against Prime Minister Gaston Brown having a LIAT 2020. I'm not against that at all. It's only that in the case of St. Vincent and Grenadines, our position is simple. I'm not going to fight the future in respect to the requisites of air transportation in the new period to have it in the most efficacious ways. And I'm not looking forward to the past. So those are the two principles. As always, we have to hang the thing on some fundamentals.
Yes, not looking forward to the past. Interesting. I mean, Prime Minister, you've been on this road for 20 years.
It's a long road and many rivers still to cross.
Many rivers to cross.
A long road and many rivers to cross still.
Yeah. But I would just add that I'm hoping that either at the level of the OECS or CARICOM, perhaps the OECS, because we focus on the Eastern Caribbean, that the Minister of Tourism could also, and Civil Aviation, could also be mandated to sort of ensure this coordination takes place. In other words, I'm seeing an opportunity here for us to address some of the structural issues that you started with.
Absolutely.
But somebody has to kind of keep an eye on the entire picture, the big picture, and ensure it's joined up.
That's why we don't need recriminations.
Indeed.
And we need a patience and a calm.
Indeed.
Knowing always that sun brightens stone.
Indeed. Words of wisdom indeed. Right. So Prime Minister, there's a question here. What is the you mentioned July 31st. Is that the AGM for LIAT? Is that the shareholders about 2020? What just speak to that a little bit, please. You're muted, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, please unmute.
Sorry.
Yes.
I just got this today at 4:31 p.m. Please note that an extraordinary general meeting of the company's shareholders will be held on the 31st of July 2020 at 10 a.m. at LIAT's head office, Annex Room, Sealy Building, Sir George Walter Highway, Coolidge, Antigua. The documents are attached. The extraordinary general meeting is convened to conduct special business as outlined in the notice and draft agenda. And there are several documents for this, and including in this a resolution to amend the Articles of Association, a note to shareholders on the proposal to liquidate LIAT. There's a proposal from KPMG in respect of they were identified by Barbados, because an earlier meeting has asked Barbados to have one or more entities provide a proposal to be liquidators. I am not myself at one with this proposal, but that's something for discussion. The resolution for winding up, and naturally information on the financial condition of LIAT. So that's where we are, you know, and we this is following upon the decision which had been taken by the board of directors on the 23rd of June and by the major shareholders.
Right.
But in the meantime, as you may be aware, last weekend, I think on Saturday and then on Monday, I haven't seen the law, understand that the Parliament of Antigua and Barbuda has made certain amendments to the Companies Act to provide for administration akin to a Chapter 11 in the U.S. system. Yes. I haven't seen the amendment of the law, but because whatever is done has to be done in relation to the laws of Antigua and Barbuda, of course, their laws there touching and concerning insolvency. But while all that is going on, I also have a note here which was sent to me at 3:47 today. Please, this is to the directors from the CEO. Please be advised that all creditors and service providers are currently taking action to deny LIAT further services due to the non-payment of outstanding balances. We expect that this will continue and get progressively worse in the next few days, following the notice of the upcoming meetings. It is very likely that LIAT will not be in a position to maintain even minimum administrative activity to the end of July, because money is needed for pre-liquidation costs. We are not dealing now with liquidation costs and severance and all that. I mean, there are pre-liquidation costs regarding, I can identify some of them. First of all, salaries, outstanding salaries for those who are kept on which have not been paid. Maintenance of aircraft, insurance. You have some employees who have to be repatriated to their home countries, and rental, about 50 of them, rental of offices, equipment, and utilities, and renewal of navigation and flight software. Those, that alone, 10.8 million EC dollars. I mean, this is, of course, in addition to what will happen, there are liquidation costs. The liquidator himself, when I said that there are aspects of the proposal that I don't agree with by the liquidator, without going into anything in detail. You know, a liquidator needs some working capital. A liquidator needs certain, anybody who's involved in a liquidation needs certain monies for, well, it's own fees, really. They don't do work for nothing. So,
but Prime Minister,
I'm taking the public into the confidence so that when they hear things, they don't say, well, how they say they're going to liquidate and they're having all this problem. There are issues to be dealt with, even as you go to liquidation.
Right.
Legal matters, practical matters, which have to be done. So that's why I was saying LIAT, it would be a pity if LIAT is liquidated disorderly.
Right. Well, you don't want a disorderly liquidation because that is even more expensive and time consuming. You absolutely have to avoid that.
Yes.
But a question, Prime Minister, on the severance issue, when is that likely to be dealt with? Is that going to be dealt with as part of the liquidation, or are the government and shareholders planning to meet to deal with that?
It has to be dealt with as part of the liquidation process, but it is unlikely that where given the state of LIAT's assets, that and the extent of the liabilities, that you will get to that item in the pecking order, that there will be money to pay the liquidation, and the liquidation costs. You have the number here, Timothy. If I could give some idea, which was provided to me. $84 million. And this calculation is based on the existing collective agreements.
Mhm.
Of course, under the laws of liquidation, the number may well be less.
Right.
But that's a liquidator's business. I'm dealing with what under the collective agreement.
Right.
Antigua and Barbuda, with 372 employees, is $61.6 million of the 84. Barbados with 93 employees is $15.1 million, Eastern Caribbean. Grenada, 45 employees with $2.5 million. St. Lucia, 37 employees, 1.3. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, 41 employees, 1.4. You may wonder why is it that the only former employees in Grenada, that the severance is 2.5. And one in St. Vincent, 1.4, 1.5. It has to do with the average length of service of the employees. And then there's smaller numbers. Dominica is the next big one, 30 employees for $500,000. And a little bit in Trinidad, Guyana, Guadeloupe, Puerto Rico, Martinique, because a lot of the staff there are not LIAT staff, but employed by LIAT to perform certain services. And there are many in Barbados who are employed by other persons, by other entities who do work for LIAT. But in addition to that, you have total vacation pay of $10 million. Antigua is $6.9 million. So you see between severance and holidays paid, you're talking about $94 million. Now, if you come out, Timothy, from the legal framework of litigation, from liquidation or administration, and the severance and holidays money can't be dealt with for the employees, it means now governments would have to apply moral and social criteria as to how they address this.
Yes.
The legal obligation having gone through the EDOs, as Barbadians would say, in respect of the holiday, the severance and holidays with pay. The question now, would the governments pay in whole or in part, and what proportion would they pay for the employees in their own country? In the case of Antigua and Barbuda, they're countries of other nationalities, persons of other nationalities. Is there going to be an agreement that if there's a Vincentian pilot there, and if we're going to pay any money, St. Vincent and Grenadines, we pay for that pilot? Then there are other severance payment. Then there are other costs. What should you prioritize in respect of moral and social criteria? What about the farmer who sells his animal, his bull cow, as we say? You can't have a bull cow, but you know what you mean, a bull,
yes,
cattle, and and he takes his $600-700 US and buy a ticket to go and see his daughter in Tortola, and you couldn't get. LIAT says we're not working anymore, we're not functioning anymore. Therefore, the credit which we say you have is really a fiction. And there's some $11 million of such credit up to the month of May itself. Now, what do you prioritize? Or do you treat them equally? What about a small restaurateur or a small hotelier? They owe LIAT owes them money. What about a small taxi service? You're now moving outside of the legal realm of priorities. What is in the priorities? And you're now addressing moral and social considerations to come to a conclusion. What do? These are judgments to be made. As always, we have to function in accordance with certain principles. And I would find it difficult to think that democratic governments in the region, in relation to employees and certain other kinds of creditors I'm talking about, that we could be bandits. The matter is this though, how are you going to give preference in relation to one or the other? If it is outside of the legal framework, can you be taken to court if you're doing anything that you have not carried out an equality of treatment in relation to all creditors? So it's a Pandora's box. I'm mixing all kind of metaphors here, but I articulate a principle of non-banditry. It's a difficult question, and I see you shaking your head because I don't think that even the governor would have spent a lot of time thinking about some of these ramifications.
Yeah,
but
well,
he knows it. He who feels it knows it.
He who feels it knows it, and like
In
I
every
said,
respect.
I mean, we feel it. We feel it. You know, obviously for a region, we feel it for the staff.
Absolutely.
And it's a tough situation. I mean, as I understand it, they have not been paid since the end of March.
But you notice that I am very careful how I represent things because I don't want what I say to be put in an affidavit in a court setting, which will bind the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines one way. Understood.
So I heard the principle of non-banditry, and I heard the principle of flexibility.
Well,
as we go forward
without any specific assurance.
Indeed. Yeah, thank you, Prime Minister. It's a heavy discussion, but obviously it's a difficult situation, and we've had to talk about that tonight. All right, let's pivot and let's go back to the questions and take a couple more. I just want to recognize we have with us from St. Vincent the Grenadines, NBC Radio, we have Nice FM, and we have Praise FM. And we want to thank you for joining us as well tonight. So let's take the next question. Can any airline operate profitably without government subsidy? Can any airline operate profitably, I'm assuming within the Eastern Caribbean, without government subsidy?
I think so, but they would operate in a way in their own parameters. For instance, SVG Air has been operating profitably within its own framework. And so too for since One Caribbean is on, though they have been on not too long. And Inter-Caribbean has 28 years, and CAL has turned a profit in the last couple of years. But they would do things for their, within, as Justin pointed out earlier, in terms of the returns to their equity, to their capital.
Yes.
And if a service is to be provided, but which will not provide the necessary returns, well, then the state has to decide, the government has to decide whether or not it provides for that particular route what is a subsidy, but which is called a minimum revenue guarantee. But we do minimum revenue guarantees for international carriers because they bring tourists, which fill hotel rooms and employ people and buy goods and services and pay value-added tax. So what you lose on the swing, you will gain on the roundabout. So these are decisions which will have to be made. But something which I didn't think Justin addressed is what I had said earlier on as an important structural factor. The very small and fractured market in the region. And it is clearly a matter of consequence, and the region afflicted by serious climate change. I mean, when you look at the numbers, I see, for instance, in 2013, in any time we have big storms in the region, in 2011, LIAT lost $43.6 million. In 2013, $56.9 million. In those years, you had we had a lot of disasters in different countries.
Yes.
In fact, the years between 2010 and 2014, that 5-year period, LIAT lost $245.8 million. In the last 5 years, they've lost $127.7 million. Of course, they cut out a lot of social routes. There were a number of reforms and so forth. But the way the thing has piled up in the recent period with Timothy, greater difficulty in financing because IMF program, COVID, and all the rest of it. The airline doesn't operate in a vacuum, as Justin quite rightly pointed out. It operates in a real economy and real natural circumstances. But people tend to forget these factors and just look at the airline as, you know, a popular thing is that Ralph put, one of the problems is that Ralph has a politician on the board. Now, the representative for St. Vincent and Grenadines on the board of directors is Isaac Solomon, who was the budget director once in St. Vincent and Grenadines, who became an employee of the central bank in a senior capacity, and who, for the last several years, the highly trained man, has been in the private sector as the head of RBTT banking in the Eastern Caribbean. It's difficult to conceive that you could get a better board member than Isaac Solomon. So, but you get this kind of a talk. But there are certain structural and legacy factors, some of which I mentioned, some which Justin mentioned. And that's why I say that I am not looking forward to the past.
Right, right. So, Prime Minister, on that, there's a question here that so President Warren Smith, President of the Caribbean Development Bank, had spoken about the issue of taxes and so on, and you've talked about that. Recommended a reduction in crippling taxes which severely affected LIAT and hindered interregional travel. The question is that, why has it taken so long, is the question, for some of these arrangements, these reforms to take place? Because the numbers that you have just announced, and even for somebody like myself, I was not aware of the extent of the subsidization or the extent of support. I mean, you are speaking of hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 10 years. And so one of the questions is, why has it taken us so long to perhaps make more drastic decisions about trying to get sustainability? And of course, recognizing the climatic events to which you referred, but.
The thing is you would see that there has been effort and the numbers have fallen. But yes. But between 2017 and now, and with other factors taking place, it just becomes too heavily burdensome. And in relation to the taxes, the people are demanding a better airport facility. And you provide a better airport facility, somebody has to pay for it. And among the persons who are at the head of the queue to pay for it are persons who use the airport. Of course, like everything else, if you go too high, you're cutting off your nose and spoiling your face. So there has to be this very scientific assessment. And I think the received wisdom, and the Caribbean Development Bank has been very insistent on this, and we will see whether they are correct. And Justin himself has done research in this regard. In the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, our tax of $40 US is among the lowest in the region. But as soon as COVID took place, on March 25th, I delivered a speech and said that from May the 1st, we will reduce the taxes to $20 because US. So that I know there has to be an upswing in regional transport. It didn't get done by then because COVID raged more in our source markets. And we are now, it has been implemented, and it's in the IATA system. And other countries are reducing. And I'm hopeful that we will see a significant reduction. It helps if you leave St. Vincent to go to Barbados, that the reduction here is $20 on the ticket. But it would be very helpful if there's a similar reduction in Barbados. And we may find that it'd be interesting to see if there's greater travel between St. Vincent and Grenada, St. Vincent and Grenadines and Grenada, because both of our countries have reduced the taxes, and so on and so forth. We will have some real test cases.
We certainly will. But as Justin said, Prime Minister, we've looked at price elasticities on this matter, and it clearly shows that, we will test it now, but a 20% reduction, a 50% reduction will in fact incentivize more travel. All the studies that we've seen over the last 10 years, and Justin could attest to that, suggest that in the net, you will be ahead.
The thing is, that's what the modeling says.
That's what the modeling says. So now we will
now have the test, because Thomas Kuhn, the physicist turned social scientist, in the 1953 classic, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, addressed precisely this question. So we will, among others, so we will see how the real world matches up to the modeling. I suspect in this case, we would probably be ahead of the game with the reduction of the taxes. I feel so. That's my considered judgment too. Right.
Good, thanks for that. So let's see, we have about, I think, 5 minutes just about before we conclude, and I do want to, Mr. Mack, you've been quiet for a little while. Is there anything you would like to say before I ask each of you for your closing? Do you want to weigh in on any matter that you?
Thank you, Governor. With respect to the question you asked earlier as to the measures that the ECA will put in place to guarantee the safety of operations by the various airlines that would come in. We're looking at two groups: airlines that are registered by the ECA, where the normal audits, inspections, and surveys are required to ensure that these airlines are operating safely. The second group would be the foreign registered aircraft. We at ECA normally conduct surveillance in all of the islands. Now, with an increase in the operation and as well as the operators, foreign operators within the OECS, the ECA would have to increase its surveillance on these aircraft. Generally, you look to ensure that the airworthiness certificates and other certificates are up to date. Likewise, the pilot's licensing and so on. These checks are very efficient, and they are not designed to delay the ground time of any aircraft. They are done. They can be done in a matter of minutes, depending on the size of the aircraft. It will be in and out, and I hope by saying this, the traveling public would have some comfort that the foreign aircraft, the inter-Caribbean and so, would be looked on by the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority in order to guarantee as best as possible the safety of our people.
Mm-hmm. May I, Timothy, ask my brother Mac something? Because, you know, Mac as a regulator, you have to listen to his words very, very carefully. And I've known him for many years, and he was in diplomacy for us and into this business. With this increased surveillance, you're going to need increased staff.
Yes.
And operational costs of ECA would be more. It can only be borne by two entities: the airlines which you survey, or by the governments. But already, the money which we charge because of the small size of the market, we charge for the airline companies, the operators, is already in many cases not competitive with some other jurisdictions which have a larger market. Now, do you see in these circumstances that the governments will have to cough out more money to ECA for the matter of the supervisory authority, the supervisory functions, the regulatory functions that you perform?
Thank you for your question. Chances are there can be an increase, but I would like to remind you that we are doing the surveys all now. This is part of our normal operations. Like I said, there would be an increase in operations, so there may likely be an increase in surveys. Once these airlines are going through, they operate, for example, in Antigua, it's in Vincent and the Grenadines and elsewhere. Our activities in that respect are usually combined with other activities that we are required to do. In other words, we will not just travel or send a couple of inspectors to Argyle International just for surveillance work. We would take an opportunist position in that when these inspectors go to carry out other functions, then they will combine both functions. You understand what I'm saying?
Right. So while you're going to Argyle to look at the aerodrome, you'll also look at One Caribbean and SVG Air and do a number of other things.
Not really. Those are different specialties. But when the inspectors go to look at the operators in St. Vincent and the Grenadines at Argyle, they will also do surveillance work at the same time.
Okay. All right.
This is normally done, yeah?
Okay. All right. So I think what we're hearing as we move to the conclusion is that there are moves afoot to have some service available to our region. Some services have already begun, others are expected. We have heard that the bubble will allow people to move, so assuming that there is a service, meaning airlines to move people, the bubble will allow movement. We've also heard that the regulator, ECA, is on the job and is already doing certain surveillance and would be prepared to do whatever is required for any additional airlines that will be operating in the region or expanding their operations in the Eastern Caribbean. And so I think perhaps this is a hopeful note on which for us to conclude that while there are clearly challenges, and of course the situation with LIAT will unfold. There is a meeting we heard on the 31st of July. And then there are other difficult but important decisions that will have to be made. And of course, we will hear about the proposal on the 2020 by Prime Minister Brown out of Antigua and Barbuda. The public, I think, should come away feeling that there's significant work underway with respect to delivering reliable, safe, affordable, and sustainable air travel services in our region. And that while we have to be patient, the work is advancing so that we ought not to despair. That's what I'm taking away from the conversation. But I'm going to give each gentleman an opportunity in a minute to give your key takeaways or your parting shots. So, Justin, can we start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Timothy. And I think I also want to end this by coming away from this on a positive note as well. I think that we have a great opportunity to have, I would say, more private sector involvement in our aviation industry. But I also want to reiterate the point that there has to be an understanding that all of the players have to play a part in this, from the governments, the regulators, the airline operators, the tourism tour operators, the hoteliers. This is an entire economy and social contract that we now need to look at. We all need to play our role. This also means that those persons who are, for example, customs officers, immigration officers, they have a great role to play in this. And I think we need to find some way as to how we incentivize everyone within this new framework to understand that greater levels of productivity and efficiency are what is required for this to work well. One thing I want to say as well is that on some routes, as Dr. Gonsalves was saying, we know that those are going to be natural monopolies, but we can think about new ways of incentivizing airlines to operate on those routes so that if we have to do revenue guarantees on those routes, they can be as minimal as possible. So one idea I have here is that we can think about franchising those routes and making those natural monopolies contestable. So maybe every 5 or 7 years, we say to those operators, we are going to invite other operators to put in bids to do this, making it contestable so that the incumbent knows that they have to continuously be improving their service or else they can be out of that service, if you understand what I'm saying. But the main point I want to say here is that we have a great opportunity with digitalization to do things differently. I think that now we have to look forward to that new future and say, look, we are not looking backwards, as Dr. Gonsalves has said, we're looking forward and let us try new things. But at the forefront of our minds, we know that safety is important. The safety of the traveling public is so important, but we're also making sure that we put the right regulations in place to ensure that private sector involvement can be at the forefront of what we want to do. And I'm not saying private sector involvement in terms of large corporations. I'm also saying that we give everyone an opportunity to have a stake. Every citizen in our countries a stake in what is going on here. Give them an opportunity to have an ownership share in any of these new entities that might take hold in our region. So Timothy, I want to say thank you for this opportunity, but I am leaving this very hopeful. I think we have a great opportunity if we work together to make this a success for our region. Our people demand nothing less. And I think it's all within our powers to ensure that this becomes successful, that we can have a sustainable air transport industry for us. Because ultimately, this is what we need as Caribbean people. We are one, and we have to ensure that we can get together and be able to have a line, as it were. We have to understand that is our task now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you for your perspectives tonight. Mr. McPhail, Director General, final thoughts?
Well, again, thanks for the invitation. I would like to refer to the opening remarks by Dr. Ram, in which he threw out the idea of a common civil aviation authority for the region. I believe Prime Minister Gonsalves mentioned CASUS, Caribbean Aviation Safety, Security and Oversight System. CASOS is working towards becoming what we call a Regional Safety Oversight Organization, an RSOO. There is some level of cooperation already within CASOS. I speak specifically of the transnational inspectors. For example, an inspector from the ECCA can go to Guyana on the request of the CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority of Guyana, and conduct inspections on behalf of that CAA. Likewise, Trinidad and Tobago can conduct inspections in the OECS, and as well as the other territories. The members of CASOS to date are the OECS, of course, Barbados, Jamaica, Haiti, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago, and Suriname. So we basically cover the English-speaking Caribbean, we cover Suriname, as well as Guyana in South America. So it's so far, it's still in the embryonic stages, but we have achieved a lot, and we will continue to strengthen. We are receiving technical assistance from EASA, the European Aviation Safety Agency, with respect to training as well as developing of certain structures within CASOS. One major thrust is with respect to accident investigation, where the International Civil Aviation Organization is not comfortable with the investigators of accidents and incidents in a particular state being part of that civil aviation authority, that state civil aviation authority. So the EASA is assisting in the development of a separate accident and investigation agency to be utilized by all 7 member states. Of course, we do not welcome any accident or incident, but it's a requirement that you have such an agency. And rest assured, this is to Prime Minister Gonsalves, we will not be overly invasive in what we do, and we will try to be as effective and efficient as possible to ensure that aviation in the region grows and functions in as seamless a manner as is possible. And having mentioned that, we need to look at the seamless transfer of passengers, the seamless in-transit stops through the territories. And I would like to remind everyone of the need for the states to finalize the one-stop security arrangement, whereby once a passenger is screened in Antigua and Barbuda and is in transit or transferring over Dominica or St. Lucia, that person need not be screened again until, well, for the rest of the journey. Some of the states have not yet met all of the requirements, but that's for a different discussion. So I'm urging everyone to ensure that the states move forward with this, especially in this COVID time, because COVID now requires additional screening. It would be nice to eliminate as much as possible the security requirements for screening so that you avoid delays in transfers. I thank you and have a good evening.
Right. Thank you very much, Director General. We want to look forward to that as we look at the new travel in our region. Prime Minister, you have the final word.
May I, as they say in the United States Senate, may I cede some of my time to McPhail, my brother in charge of ECCA, for him to say a couple of words about CANAS.
Okay.
Because I think, because we are talking about resources here.
CANAS, just for the benefit of the meeting, CANAS is an acronym for the Caribbean Air Navigation Advisory Service. It's an entity operated by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, back in 1950, Trinidad and Tobago was granted the airspace in the Caribbean region. 1950 at a meeting in Havana. Now, the airspace was operated by IACL, which is a British firm. Now, what IACL had established, and which is normal, overflight charges, where aircraft transiting the airspace would have to pay per mile for transiting. There's a formula that I'm not very au fait with it, so I will not try to explain it, but it depends on the distance you fly, as well as the type of aircraft that you fly. Now, the airspace that Trinidad and Tobago is now responsible for is 750,000 square miles, or 1 million square kilometers. And each aircraft that flies through the airspace above 24,500 feet is required to pay overflight fees. IACL was approached by the government's representatives of Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and the OECS. And through negotiations, IACL decided to hand over responsibility of the management of the airspace to CANAS. Now, CANAS was established just around that time in order to manage the airspace. And according to the original plans, there was going to be a board consisting of representatives from Barbados, the OECS, Trinidad and Tobago, and the French. However, that did not materialize. The board was established, and the distribution of the directors on the board had changed somewhat to what was originally promised. So it's fully operated and managed by the government of Trinidad and Tobago with Civil Aviation Authority. I do not have the up-to-date figures on their revenue, but some years ago at a meeting, Prime Minister Gonsalves may remember that meeting in Trinidad and Tobago. In addressing the meeting, I mentioned that CANAS was grossing approximately $100 million a year.
What currency, man?
I was speaking of TT dollars, but I had not yet said TT dollars when the representative from Trinidad and Tobago intervened, and he said, no, it was 87 million, but he was talking about US dollars. It was way in excess of the estimate I had received based on research. Now, these airplanes fly over our national airspace, and the accepted international practice is that states should be paid for a fee for airplanes transiting the airspace. But Trinidad and Tobago, as the custodian of the airspace, collects all the revenue. And so far, they have resisted a revenue sharing arrangements with us. What they have done is provide some form of financial assistance to ECA member states for the acquisition of technologies, namely NAVAIDs. But the same NAVAIDs that they fund, normally they would provide about 50% the cost of a NAVAID. The price of a NAVAID is roughly $500,000 US. And a NAVAID, the normal NAVAID we use in the region may last up to 10, 15 years. So the amount that we receive in financial benefit is basically small compared to what is collected by Trinidad and Tobago. But we have been
Director General, but clearly, I mean, I think what we've unearthed here is a significant source of financing for our travel arrangements in the region, including whatever additional resources you would need. So if the governments are reducing taxes as they are now to incentivize regional travel, and if you are going to have more work to do, as you've already begun, then the resources that you need to answer Prime Minister's question ought not to come from the governments, and certainly ought not to be unduly imposed on the airlines existing on you, but it has to be drawn from a source that has been holding our funds in reserve for many years. So I hope that will be a very, CARICOM Chairman, Prime Minister, I hope that will be a very important discussion in this period, because we have to finance these arrangements from governments that are collecting, in some cases, 50% of the revenue that they were collecting before COVID. So it cannot be for the state to do, and the airlines coming in, or the existing and new airlines cannot be asked to do that, as it will put them at a disadvantage in terms of commercial or profitable operations. So this is a very serious issue. Clearly, we cannot fully, litigate it tonight, but clearly it's a source that there's some urgency, I sense, to address that. But Prime Minister, back to you.
I'm very happy that my brother McPhail went into some broad outline about CANAS. For the last 15 years, I've been fighting the battle with Trinidad and Tobago in respect of CANAS. Several letters I've written to Prime Minister Manning, my dear friend of blessed memory, to my dear sister Kamla, and to my brother Keith Rowley. None of that communication has borne fruit. I've raised it repeatedly at CARICOM, and it would not be an incorrect statement to say that I have been like a stock record on this, and you can see the reason why. It's an issue, and the way I frame it, I'm told that I talk about revenues, gross revenues, but I don't talk about expenses. I said, listen, I don't want a free ride. I want representation on the board. And I want to see the accounts. And if the expenses are more than the revenues, we will contribute to the administration. So you see the angle at which I'm going. This may well be a matter for determination at the Caribbean Court of Justice. In the days with Patrick Manning, when there was a big window set up, when there were a lot of money from the CARICOM Petroleum Fund,
yes,
the arguments were more muted because, as we say, it takes two hands to clap. And there's been quite a lot of solidarity by Trinidad and Tobago with us, including with the current government.
Right.
But this is a big issue. So that's why I didn't want the discussion on aviation, civil aviation, to be concluded without the public getting this issue ventilated. I've spoken about it repeatedly because it sounds like an esoteric subject. When Mr. McPhail talked about the French, that is between Martinique and Guadeloupe. So the Piarco Flight Information Region, as it is defined, covers the space from all the way, the 1 million kilometers come all the way down to Trinidad and going all the way up to beyond St. Kitts. So that's the space which you're dealing with. No, if I say anything wrong, McPhail can interrupt me.
All right, Prime Minister, just to remind, we're out of time. So
okay, well, I'm going to agree with everything.
Put a bow on that one first, please.
Yes.
Or do you want to end that particular one?
Well, all I'm going to say is this. I agree with everything that you have said in your summation and call them my own. I agree with almost everything that Justin has said in his summation, and I call those points my own. And I will just say on this matter, like in all matters, I'm not a man of lamentations. I follow the injunction of the prophet Jeremiah. Morning by morning, new mercies we see. All that we need, thy hand has provided. Great is thy faithfulness. And to the people of the region, I say that I will continue to do my best to push this issue of regional air transportation, the most efficient, efficacious way in which we can do it, reliable, safe, affordable, and sustainable. And as you've noticed from all that I've been saying, that we have been doing, and I, from my own position, as Prime Minister St. Vincent Grenadines and as in charge of this particular portfolio in the quasi-cabinet of CARICOM, there's lots of things which we are doing, and hopefully they can all come together in the manner in which we have been talking. And I'm very happy for this discussion.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister. It has been certainly elucidating for all of us. I think we now appreciate more fully the depth and some of the difficulties, but also the opportunities. And I think we can look forward as a region to a new and better regional air travel arrangements. And whatever else we say about COVID-19, the pandemic, it offers us opportunities. And as I've always said, and I repeat tonight in my closing, a growth mindset is about reframing our problems into opportunities. And that is what we will need as we proceed to redefine, to reimagine, to reconfigure, and to deliver a safe, reliable, affordable, sustainable air travel service across our region. So my heartfelt thanks to our panelists, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and Grenadines, and our current CARICOM Chairman, Dr. Justin Ram, CEO and founder of GTEC and Justin Ram Advisory, and Mr. Donald McPhail, Director General of the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority, better known as ECCA. I also want to thank all participants who have joined us tonight via Zoom, Facebook, radio, and television across the currency union and further afield. I want to thank the radio stations, television stations for partnering with us tonight on this very important subject. And I also want to thank our team at the ECCB, and that includes Dr. Mcfear Sodo, the coordinator of our dialogues, Alston Crawford, Karina Phillips Summersall, Marlon Bristol, Marlon Davis, Olivia Langhorn, and of course, we also had Mikla Swift, Lyndon Jacasal, who did the poll, and Elizabeth Whalen. And I'm sure there are others, Shermilan Corby, among others, Zana Bernard, among others. So all of my colleagues, for all of your efforts to assist us with ensuring we had a very lively and engaging discussion tonight. Heartfelt thanks to you all. God bless you and see you. Our next digital dialogue will be on July 30th, when we will have another round on our digital currency or digital cash. So you can look forward to that. I also want to, and that will be at 8. And then I also want to remind you that you can expect us to continue to share with you on a number of issues in the banking system going forward. And I suspect we may have another round on regional transport as we go along. And I hope the panelists would avail themselves, if necessary, to come back to further update on progress with this very important work. Thank you very much, everyone. Good night. God bless you all.